The names Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, the Manson family, Ted Bundy, and others are synonymous with the words serial killer. We tend to think of murder as a somewhat modern-day crime, and many older people will say the world has gotten bad and people are getting mean. But if you take a look through history, murder and even serial murders are a crime as old as time. A closer look will show you that there are a few female serial killers that definitely left their mark on the world.
Triple Studios proudly presents Mystery, Murder, and Magic. And here's your host, Andrea Lee.
Hey y'all, and thanks for joining me for episode 3. Today we're going to talk about female serial killers. Now, I've been an ID addict, the ID channel that is, for many years. I'm not so much into the crime itself, but mostly what makes the killer tick and, how they solve the cases. The first female serial, or one of the first female serial killers I can remember seeing on the ID channel was Belle Gunness. So we're going to talk about her first. Belle Gunness was born in 1859 in Norway. She immigrated to America in 1881 in search of a better life. Shortly after marrying Albert Sorensen in 1884, the couple's store and home burned, and they claimed insurance money for both buildings. Now, not long after that, Mr. Sorensen himself died from heart failure. Belle collected even more insurance money because on the day of his death, Mr. Sorensen's 2 insurance policies overlapped. It's believed that during their short marriage, the couple produced 2 kids that Belle poisoned during infancy for the insurance money. I can't even imagine poisoning, well, really anybody, but not little infants. And all for greed, So after Mr. Sorenssen's death, Belle married Peter Gunness, but soon he and their baby daughter died. Now, it's believed that up to 40 unfortunate souls died at the hands of Belle Gunness, including her adopted daughter, Jenny, and men that she met through ads and personal ads in local newspapers. Her ad in the papers read, "Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County desires to make the acquaintance of gentlemen equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply." So basically what she was saying was that she was looking for rich gentlemen that would put her name on their fortunes, and you have to also visit if you send her a letter. Now, apparently she attracted a good bit of suitors this way. One by one, her victims were lured to the farm. At first, it was believed that there was up to 10 men that answered her ads, but later it was found more likely to be 20 or 30 men that she lured there. Now, soon after that, Belle's farm and home went up in flames. When workers were sifting through the remains of the house, they found 4 skeletons, 3 of which were Belle's foster kids. Now, it just floors me that she was trusted with foster kids because, who didn't suspect her of all the deaths that surrounded her? Well, it appears that a hired hand was assumed to be the culprit of this latest fire and the murders of the bodies found because in 1908, Ray Lamphere was charged with murder and arson, but only found guilty of the arson charge. After that fire, one of her victims' brothers became suspicious, and so authorities started digging around more on the property, and one by one, body after body was found. Now, before Mr. Lamphere passed away in prison, he ratted Belle out. It was assumed that the 4th body found was Belle's, but she had planned the entire scheme and had skipped town, but not before withdrawing all of her money from the bank. For years, there were alleged sightings of Belle. In 2008, a forensics team from the University of Indianapolis exhumed the remains of what is believed to be Belle's coffin. They were hoping to use DNA from a letter that Belle had sent one of her victims. They were hoping to prove that Belle had died in that fire, but due to its age, they couldn't use the letter to get the DNA. All right. And that's all about Belle Gunness. Now, here's our next one. Have you ever heard of Juana Barraza? Juana Barraza was born in 1958 and was a Mexican professional wrestler. But it wasn't her wrestling career that made her famous. Barraza was dubbed the Old Lady Killer, and at least 11 deaths of women over 60 are attributed to her. Estimates by newspapers range from 24 to 49 deaths. Her reign of terror began in the late 1990s and continued through 2006. Her methods included strangling and bludgeoning, and after her victims took their last breaths, she robbed them. Mexican authorities were reporting that the suspect in these murders was a male dressed in women's clothing, so it took a while to track Barraza down. In January of 2006, a major break came in the case when a suspect was arrested while leaving the home of her victim, 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, who Barraza had strangled with a stethoscope. The people of Mexico were surprised to learn that the serial killer was none other than Juana Barraza, who was known by her wrestling name, the Silent Lady. Although they had been searching for a man, authorities later admitted that Barraza closely resembled a composite sketch of the suspect. Prosecutors say that evidence from fingerprints linked her to 10 other murders, but as many as 40 murders are blamed on her. In the spring of 2008, Barraza was brought to trial, being blamed for as many as 40 murders, but Barraza only admitted to the death of Alfaro. She was found guilty of 16 charges of murder and aggravated burglary. She was sentenced, and get this, to a whopping 759 years in prison. $759. That's a lot of years. Of course, she won't live to serve all those out, but anyway. Okay, our next one is Jane Toppan. That was a name that I wasn't familiar with until I started researching Juana Barraza, and Jane's name came out. Now, Jane's mother, Janie, died when Jane was a little girl from tuberculosis. Her father, Peter, wasn't a very stable person, and at one time, he sewed his eyelids shut with tools from his tailor shop. He tried to raise Jane and her sisters, but he was unable to, and in 1863, he took the three girls to the Boston Female Asylum, which was an orphanage in the South End of Boston. Jane's older sister, Delia, ended up as a prostitute and alcoholic, and her younger sister, Nellie, ended up in an insane asylum. In 1885, Jane went to the Cambridge Hospital to train as a nurse. Jane became a popular co-worker and a favorite among patients because of her upbeat personality. They even gave her the nickname Jolly Jane. But now in her off time from the hospital, she wasn't so likable. She'd get very drunk and she'd spin insane gossip tales to turn her friends against one another. After a while, it was noticed that Jane had an unusual fascination with autopsies, and you could say she was even obsessed with them. There was also a high rate of death on Jane's shift. 4 years later, Jane was transferred to Massachusetts General Hospital. Again, the high rate of deaths alarmed Jane's superiors, and she was released from her job. And even though she was released under those suspicions, sorry, I can't talk today, she still came with high recommendations from doctors to rich clients as a private nurse. In her string of murders, she murdered her landlord and his wife, a close friend who was a matron of a dining hall so that she could take her job, and then her foster sister, Elizabeth Toppan. She invited Elizabeth to a seaside picnic where they could catch up, but Jane had ill intentions for Elizabeth. Jane served corned beef, taffy, and water laced with strychnine. Jane is quoted as saying, "I held her in my arms and watched with delight as she gasped her life out." That's a psycho for you. But wait, there's more. Soon after Elizabeth's death, Jane moved in with Elizabeth's widower, Oramel Brigham. Jane even asked Oramel to marry her, but he turned her down, and that made Jane furious. She poisoned him, but she didn't kill him. She nursed him back to health, and then she proposed again. His answer was still no, and then he threw her out of the house. Well, after that, Jane moved on to the Davis family, where she was renting a room from them. She was unable to pay her rent, so she started killing them one by one, including two married sisters, or two married daughters of this family, Minnie Gibbs and Geraldine Gordon. Well, Minnie's father-in-law wouldn't let go of the feeling that there's no way all the Davises could just randomly die like that, so he insisted on an investigation. It was revealed that Minnie had died of morphine and atropine, linking Jane back to all the previous deaths at her job as a nurse in the two hospitals. Finally, in 1901, Jane was arrested. And after nearly 2 decades of poisoning patients, she was finally being brought to justice. Jane confessed to her crimes, and there were at least 31 deaths. Victims who had survived her attempts to murder them also came forward. They stated they had thought they were dreaming of being poisoned and sexually harassed, but they weren't dreaming at all. It only took a jury 27 minutes to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. She was sentenced to the rest of her life to the Taunton State Hospital, which is an insane asylum in Massachusetts. Jane passed away at the age of 84 on August 17th, 1938. And last but not least, we have Kristen Gilbert. When Kristen was a child, she exhibited a very high scholastic aptitude, meaning she was one smart cookie. She even graduated high school at the age of 16. As she grew into her teens, friends and family started noticing that she would lie about anything and everything. She told her friends that she was a distant relative to Lizzie Borden. She also had somewhat neurotic behavior and started stealing from friends. She once stole a blouse from a friend. She showed up at that friend's house wearing the blouse. When the friend questioned her because she knew her blouse like that was missing, Kristen lied and said it was hers. So after high school, she attended Greenfield Community College and graduated in 1988 as a registered nurse. In 1989, she became employed with VAMC in Northampton, Massachusetts. Kristen made quite a name for herself early on in her career there and was even featured in the magazine VA Practitioner in 1990. She was the co-worker that would remember birthdays and would organize gift exchanges at the holidays. By all accounts and appearances, Kristen seemed like a professional at her job and was the social butterfly of the C ward. In the beginning, other nurses noticed a high rate of deaths on her shift, but they didn't think much of it, and jokingly they called her the Angel of Death. Later, though, they noticed the high number of cardiac arrest deaths and a diminishing supply of epinephrine, so they reported it to their superiors, and an investigation was started. Now, it's not known, or clearly known, what her motives were. It's thought that maybe she got a thrill or an inflated ego by setting up these emergency situations, because there was a high rate of cardiac arrest in this time period, and many of them survived because she helped revive the patients. There was even speculation that she created these emergencies to get the attention of a certain VA police officer who she soon had an affair with. It was the VA's policy that a VA police officer had to be present during any emergency that was taking place. Once the affair with the officer started, Kristen's husband was convinced that she was trying to kill him because he had started noticing that his food had an odd taste. One particular death of Kristen's that stands out is that one night Kristen asked her superior if her patient died, could she leave work? Apparently, she was anxious to meet up with her police officer boyfriend. The superior told her yes. Within hours